Hello and welcome to Modified Internal Rate of Return. My name's Jeff, I'm glad you're here. Let's just jump right in. This function measures an investment's rate of return with custom financing and reinvestment rates. Stick around till exercise 3 because I'll show you how it can totally change which investment looks best. Let's head to the first exercise, exercise 1. Let's say we invest $10,000 and expect to receive this series of future cash flows. We want to know what is the rate of return. That way we can kind of compare, would we rather do this or stick this money in a CD? So equals IRR. We provide the values, close function, and enter. And this is indicating an internal rate of return of 12%. But here's the thing, baked into that calculation is a couple of key assumptions. First of all, it assumes no financing rate. And second of all, it assumes that these cash flows are reinvested into this investment, earning the same rate of return. In other words, year one, when we have this positive cash flow, this is assuming that the $1,000 is reinvested back into this investment. And this $2,000 is also reinvested back into this investment, and so on. And sometimes that might be a fair assumption, but sometimes it's not. Sometimes we may take this positive cash flow and stick it into a bank account, and the bank account might be earning a lot lower interest rate. So how do we account for that? Well, that's where the MIRR function comes into play. Let's go to the next exercise, exercise 2. So this is our initial investment amount. This is the series of cash flows. Let's try the standard IRR function. The values are here in C8 to C13. Close function and enter. We get 12%. This assumes all these positive cash flows are reinvested back into this investment. But what if that's not true? Well, the MIRR function allows us to customize the finance rate and the reinvestment rate. The finance rate is the interest rate you pay on the money used in cash flows. In other words, this is the rate that's applied to negative cash flow values. And the reinvest rate is the interest rate you receive on positive cash flows. For example, if you'd put this into a CD. So let's now compute the modified internal rate of return. Equals MIRR. The values are once again the values in C8 to C13, comma. The finance rate is here. Once again, that's the rate that's applied to negative cash flow values, comma. The reinvest rate is here. And once again, that's the rate that's applied to positive cash flow values. Close function and enter. And as we can see, when we use those assumptions, our modified internal rate of return is 9.3%. Now, let's see how we can use this function to compare different investment opportunities. We'll head into the next exercise, exercise 3. Here we have 3 different opportunities. They all require an initial investment of $10,000, and they all return $15,000. The only difference is the timing. Project A returns it evenly, Project B returns less in the beginning and more at the end, and Project C returns more at the beginning and less at the end. Which one has a higher internal rate of return? Let me know in the comments. Now let's use Excel to calculate it. Equals IRR. The values of Project A are here in C7 to C12. Close function and enter. And that looks like an internal rate of return of about 15.2%. Let's look at Project B. The values are here, close function, and enter. That has an internal rate of return of about 12%. And let's look at Project C. Here's our values, close function, and enter. And that has an internal rate of return of 20%. So were your instincts right? Well, we know from previous videos that money today is worth more than money tomorrow. So we would suspect that Project C blows the other projects way out of the water. And we can see the IRR function confirms it. Like Project C is 20% and Project B is only 12%. That is a huge difference. Now, as we discussed, this function assumes that we're reinvesting all of these cash flows back into these projects. And if that is true, cool. But what if it's not true? What if we want to consider financing rates and if we have a different reinvestment rate? In other words, what if we take these cash flows out of this project and put them somewhere else? Well, for that, we'll use the modified internal rate of return function. Equals MIRR. The values for Project A are here, comma. The finance rate is the value in C16, and the reinvest rate is the value in C17. Close function and enter. And here we get 9.8%. Let's do the same thing for Project B. The values are here, comma. The finance rate is the value in D16, and the reinvest rate is D17. Close function and enter. Now that's 9.3%. Not as big of a difference. And let's take a look at Project C. The values are here, comma. The finance rate is here, and the reinvest rate is in E17, close function and enter, and we get 10.2%. So what's interesting is by changing these assumptions about what we're doing with negative and positive cash flows, it really impacts the modified internal rate of return. And when we use these assumptions, as we can see, the rate of return is much more comparable. So that's how we can calculate the modified internal rate of return. And we can customize the finance rate and the reinvestment rate. Hopefully this has been helpful. Thanks for joining me. Have a great day. Hey Excel user, if you ever need to create summary reports, check out my pivot table for beginners video. It starts at the beginning and shows how to store the data transactions in a table and then how to summarize those transactions with a pivot table report. I hope it helps unlock the incredible power of pivot tables.
This video is a production of Excel University.